On the 7th of October 1992, an 88-year-old man died in a village on the Black Sea coast of northwestern Turkey. If you'd been standing in the lane that morning, you'd have seen nothing worth remembering. A retired civil servant, a former village mayor, an ordinary funeral in an ordinary place. Linguists in 4 countries wrote the date down, because when his heart stopped, so did a language. His name was Tevfik Esenç. The village was Hacıosman. The language was Ubykh, and it carried somewhere near 81 distinct consonants, one of the largest consonant inventories ever documented in a human mouth, though the exact count shifts depending on how you analyze it. Against all those consonants, it held 2 vowels, maybe 3. On the 6th of October, there was 1 speaker of Ubykh alive on Earth. On the 8th, there were none. Here's the explanation most people carry, if they carry one at all. In 1864, the Russian Empire drove the Circassians out of the Caucasus and put them on ships to Ottoman shores, where they arrived as cargo, starving, passive, unwanted. That's a good explanation. It's humane, it's largely accurate, and the documentation underneath it is real. A Russian officer named Ivan Drozdov described the coast around Sochi during the deportations, and what he wrote I won't repeat in detail. It's also incomplete. The Ottoman office that received them, the Muhasirin Komisyonu, the Refugees Commission, was established in 1860. 4 years before the Circassians were driven to the water, there was a bureaucracy already waiting. Start with the name because the name is the first thing that went missing. They call themselves Adyghe. They have always called themselves Adyghe. Circassian is what everybody else called them, and you can watch the word cross the map like something handed between strangers. Persian, Georgian, and Arab sources of the 10th century write Kasog or Kashak. Arabic historians turn it into Jarkas. Ibn al-Athir uses it before his death around 1232, and Ibn Khaldun is still using it in the 1400s. Turkic speakers say Chirkas, common currency by the 13th century. Russian hardens it to Cherkes. English borrows the Russian, Latinizes it, and by the 1550s we have Circassian. 6 languages, 6 centuries, and not one of them theirs. What they actually had was a legal order. 12 princedoms, 3 governed democratically, 9 by aristocracy, including the Abzak, the Bjadug, the Shapsug, the Natukai, the Kabardian, and the Ubykh. 12 stars on their flag, 1 for each, not a decoration, a census. Binding all of them was Zabzi, customary law, and pointedly not the religious law of the empire next door. Zabs governed hospitality, marriage, feud, precedence, who spoke first in a room and who rose when they did. It was unwritten, it was absolutely enforced. They were not alone up there either. The North Caucasus is one of the densest linguistic landscapes on the planet. More than 50 languages inside a mountain range you could drive across in a day. And Zabze worked at a scale that's hard to hold in your head. A study of Shapsug marriage records, drawn from a sample of nearly 6,000, found 95% of marriages made within the group. Among the Abkhaz, the figure ran to 98. The equivalent measure among the French and the Irish sits near 0.02%. In plain language, for as long as anyone could measure it, these people married their own, almost without exception. That mattered more than anyone alive at the time could possibly have known. In June of 1861, the Adyghe did something that gets almost no attention now. They built a parliament. It met first at Sochi, under a chairman named Gerendiko Berzeg, and its purpose was recognition, to be seen by the world as a state with a government rather than a scatter of mountain tribes. It survived just under 3 years. It dissolved on the 21st of May, 1864, because that was the day the war ended. The place was called Kubada, a high meadow above the Black Sea. The Russians held a Thanksgiving service there and a parade. Grand Duke Mikhail Nikolaevich, brother of the Tsar and Viceroy of the Caucasus, was present, though sources disagree over whether he personally presided or whether that fell to one of his generals. The troop figures reported for that day range from 25,000 to 250,000, which is another way of saying nobody knows. 5 years later, Russian settlers were moved into the emptied meadow, and it was given a new name, Krasnaya Polyana, Red Glade. That is a very pretty name for what happened there. Those who survived the coast went into the Ottoman Empire, and here the story turns strange. In 1878, a group of them settled on a set of Roman ruins in the hills east of the Jordan Valley. The historian Vladimir Hamed Troyansky secured permission to work through the Ottoman land records for that settlement and assembled a near-complete run of its property transactions: who bought what, from whom, for how much. The village is now Amman, the capital of Jordan. The empire that took them in was not a rescuer. It scattered them on purpose, breaking a warrior people into hundreds of villages and placing them as buffers on frontiers where the government wanted Muslim settlement. By 1880, the village councils at Jable and Arab al-Mulk could not feed the refugees they'd been assigned. It wasn't a humanitarian gesture, it was policy with people inside it. Nor were they only ever on the receiving end of somebody else's state building. In September of 1970, when the Jordanian army moved against the Palestinian factions, it was led in part by Circassian officers. Then in 1930, 2 philologists went looking for Ubykh. A Hungarian, Julius von Messeros, published his transcription in 1934. A Norwegian, Hans Vogt, published a full dictionary of the language in 1963. A dictionary is what you build when you already suspect there won't be speakers. That stopped me cold when I read it. The instrument that finished the job wasn't a massacre. Massacres are loud, and they end. It was a ban. Russia closed the door behind them and made return illegal, converting a deportation into a permanence. You could survive the ships. You could survive the camps at Trabzon and Samsun. What you could not do was go home. Decades later, in the Soviet Union, came a second instrument, and this one is quiet enough to be almost elegant. One people were sorted into 4 administrative categories, each with a republic, a census box, a nationality line on a passport: Adygheans in Adyghe, Kabardians in Kabardino-Balkaria, Cherkess in Karachay-Cherkessia, Shapsug in Krasnodar Krai. They are, by every measure that matters, the same people. You don't have to ban a language if you can make its speakers fill in different forms. If you've been following these kinds of stories, if you care about what identity survives when the systems built to erase it are this patient, subscribing keeps that conversation going. These stories need telling more often, and more carefully, than they usually get told. I want to put you in a room before the evidence arrives. Istanbul, the middle of the 1960s. You are 60 years old and you work in the civil service. Across the desk sits a French scholar named Georges Dumézil. And between you is a reel-to-reel machine, heavy as a suitcase, its spools turning. He asks you for a word, you give it. He asks you to say it again, you do. He writes and asks again. Some of these sounds your mouth hasn't made aloud in months, because there is no one left to make them to, and your tongue has to be reminded how. The tea in front of you goes cold while you work, and you keep working because this is work. You are not a man remembering a language, you are the language. And then the DNA arrived. In May of 2011, a team led by Oleg Balanovsky published a study in molecular biology and evolution that had taken over a decade to assemble. 1,525 men, 14 Caucasus populations, samples gathered between 1998 and 2009 under the supervision of Elena Balanovska, tested against 40 markers on the Y chromosome and 19 more besides. They were looking for structure. What they found was a map that already existed. One paternal lineage, the label geneticists use is G2A 3B 1P303, turned up among the Shapsug, the Abkhaz, and the Circassians at rates between 21 and 86%. Everywhere else in the Caucasus it sat below 10, averaging 2. The same clean pattern repeated for 3 other lineages and 3 other language groups. When they ran the correlations, genetics tracked language more closely than it tracked geography. In the analysis that partitions the variation, linguistic grouping accounted for nearly twice what geographic grouping did. The data was answering a question history hadn't thought to ask, not where these people had lived, but who they had been permitted to marry. Then in 2019, a second team went looking specifically for the Ubykh. They located 36 men, most of them in the Turkish diaspora, descendants of the people put on those ships. 3/4 carried the same Western Caucasus lineage, and the result contradicted a standing idea that the Ubykh had absorbed the medieval Iranian Alans. The Ossetian gene pool, which does descend from that world, turned out to have almost nothing in common with them. I want to be careful here. DNA doesn't tell you who you are. It can't tell you what language you dreamt in. But here is the reversal. What the genome recorded wasn't ancestry in the abstract. It was zabs, marriage rules that nobody ever wrote down, enforced by nothing harder than obligation and shame, held so completely and for so long that they left a physical signature across an entire language family. A people's law, legible in their bodies, not by anyone's design, just by being kept. The evidence has a ceiling, and the study is honest about where it sits. In the Caucasus, language and geography are tangled together. Populations speaking related tongues also live beside each other. When Balanovsky's team tried to separate the two statistically, holding one constant to isolate the other, the results stopped being significant, and they say so in the paper. Language looks like the stronger signal. It cannot be shown to be the only one. The Ubykh study rests on 36 men and on the paternal line alone, which means it says nothing whatsoever about the women. And the death toll isn't knowable. The estimates run from 90 to 97% of the population, somewhere between 1 and 1.5 million people. I'm not going to pick a number. On the 1st of August, 1998, Circassians fleeing the war in Kosovo landed in Adyghe, and a village went up for them outside Maykop. It's called Mafakabel. Adyghe marks the date every year as the day of the repatriate. They were not saints, and they were not symbols. They were people who needed somewhere to go and had a claim on one particular somewhere. The return isn't clean. Syrian Circassians who came after 2011 have waited years for citizenship, some still holding residence permits after 2 decades. And in one recent year, the Republic's migration quota was capped at 600 people. A homeland turns out to be a jurisdiction, not only a feeling. The work goes on anyway. Deeb Kat, who came from Syria himself, co-founded a repatriation organization in 2015 to help others make the move. Community bodies called Adyghe operate from Maykop under Zarbi Chundishko and from Krasnodar Krai under Asker Sokt. In Israel, in the villages of Kfar Kama and Rehania, Adyghe is a recognized minority language. Roughly 610,000 people still speak it. Consider where we started. A meadow renamed Red Glade, a parliament that lasted 3 years, a word passed between 6 languages, none of them theirs, 12 stars for 12 princedoms, ships leaving a coast with the door locked behind them, a settlement on Roman ruins that became a capital, a dictionary written in advance, 4 passports for 1 people, a reel of tape turning in an office in Istanbul. There is a gravestone at Hacıosman, white marble. Tevfik Esenç composed the inscription himself, years before he needed it. It names him as the last person able to speak the language they called Ubykh. He wrote his own last line. The stone is still standing. The recordings still play. One more thing, quietly. If any of this landed close to home, drop your surname in the comments below and tell me which part matched your own family. The renaming, the leaving, the paperwork, or the going back. I read them.